Welcome back to the studio.
I know, this has been a little bit of time since we were here last.
We have had some technical trouble.
In trying to upgrade, we actually struggled a little bit, but that's okay.
We're learning and we're learning the tools. So, for those that are out there and still want to hear us, thanks for hanging in. Becky, what's psychological safety?
Psychological safety is feeling as if you can take care of your own mental health, well-being, and feeling safe enough to do that in your environment, whether it's at work, at home, or out in the world.
Excellent. So, what brings us to this topic today?
Interestingly enough, since the last time we did a podcast, we're always trying to get feedback from our listeners. So we have a small group of listeners we're trying to build. And as people listen to our podcast, we take the time to ask them what resonated, what did they enjoy. And this is one that seems to have hit a nerve with some folks and really resonated with them in their own personal life or in their work life. And so we felt like we should take some time and dig a little deeper. I invited you to come talk to my executive MBA class. I'm an instructor with an executive MBA program here in town, and you came and did a wonderful lecture with my students. This was also something that really resonated with them.
For sure. This was my fourth year, I think.
Yeah.
Helping you in that class or being invited to that class. And the first time that this was really a very poignant theme.
It definitely was. I think it highlights the fact that a lot of people are experiencing the same things, where we are in a very stressful environment, whether it's at work or at home. Life has challenges, and people are struggling to deal with them effectively and maintain their own personal mental health and well-being.
It would also appear that there's just a lot more, I'm going to say, toxicity in the workplace and people looking for how to navigate that. And specifically, the voice in your class, kind of that overwhelming was, what if we're not in charge? Like, what if we're not at the top of the organization from middle management? How can we affect this for ourselves and our teams also? So for those that are out there, if that's interesting to you, we're going to take about the next 16 minutes and work through our thoughts on cultivating an environment of psychological safety, which really is positive morale and positive energy in a workplace or an environment that might not always be conducive to that type of feeling.
Absolutely. And how do we encourage that in an environment that might not be conducive to it?
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
For those that are sticking in, let's get into it. So we've kind of talked about what a toxic environment is a little, but let's expand on that just a little. In your mind, what's a toxic environment?
Well, I think a toxic environment is a space where people don't feel safe to share their ideas, their thoughts openly. I'll talk maybe more about the symptoms of it, right? So symptoms of a toxic environment are places where when you have a meeting, the meeting actually happens after the meeting, where people go out in the hallway and they talk about what should have been talked about in the meeting. When you bring people together and there's a lot of silence and really one person who's doing a lot of the conversation or the talking. In those spaces are really signs of there being a high degree of toxicity, where people aren't feeling welcome to share their thoughts, their opinions, and their ideas. And that actually creates a very it perpetuates the issues that are causing that toxicity. A lot of the toxicity comes from high pressure for performance. It comes from, reorganization within a business. It comes from, competitive pressures, a lot of things that are challenging the business to be successful. And if you're in a toxic space, it's actually perpetuating those rather than using the minds and thoughts of those who are part of the team in creating solutions to have the company be successful.
I'm going to add. Okay. I agree with everything you said. I want to add one.
Okay.
How much do you think, how many Teams or Zoom or WebEx meetings do you think you do on a day?
Oh, I've actually counted. It's an astounding number. So I think the most I've had scheduled in my calendar in one day is 19.
I'm
On
I'm
average,
laughing with you,
yeah,
not at
on
you.
average, it's more than 10.
Okay, so here's my quick point. We'll move on. In how many of those meetings is there, do you think, side dialogues where people are direct messaging each other outside of the meeting?
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that also has changed the working dynamic. Back in the day,
Absolutely.
for those of us with all of this gray, back in the day when we used to always sit in a meeting room and you didn't have a laptop open in front of you, when you were uncomfortable and felt compelled to speak, you did so.
Mm-hmm.
And in today's environment, I think when you feel compelled to speak, you actually seek validation from a colleague that you trust and you
Mm-hmm.
send a direct message rather than something overt into the meeting. Just an observation and something to definitely think about. But we've built, since probably COVID and work from home and the great Zoom takeover, we've built an environment where it's much easier to validate your thoughts with one other party rather than in the context and the energy of the room.
It's an interesting thought. I 100% agree with you. I'm not sure how we get back to that space where we don't have that behind the scenes sort of validation,
I think you
right?
just yell at people and make them feel bad for doing it.
I'm not sure that's the right solution.
Mm.
I mean, I know that's what you would do,
It
but
is not what I would do. All right, let's move on. But I think,
no, I think it's a valid
as
point.
we talk about environmental factors that
Yeah.
lead to kind of, if in the years past, this has always existed. But I think now this psychological security is getting to a break point where people are really starting to feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to think that that's one of the contributors is, there's a lot of meetings I'm on where there is only one speaker. And as I heard you talk about,
Yeah.
only one person speaking, those remote meetings is a one speaker party.
I agree with you. This is maybe a podcast for another time, but if it's only a one person speaking meeting, it's really not a meeting. It's a report out.
Agreed.
Right? So I think we really have to set that standard inside of our teams.
We do. We'll move this conversation on. For those
Yeah.
that have joined us, if that's something interesting to you, feel free to leave us a comment. We'll explore this further.
Mm-hmm.
Moving back into psychological security and developing this for our teams, one of the things I know you and I have talked about, I would ask everybody to just take a minute and reflect, is the way that you're operating or that you're operating your team in an environment of survive or in an environment of thrive. And I think that's also an important ingredient to an environment to help. There's always toxicity.
Right.
Like the forces of the world want to get you. And so I think part of understanding how to create that repeatable recipe of success, understanding some of those finer points, I think is important as well.
Yeah, I think when I think about people thriving, it to me is really a space where people feel, we've talked about this before, but people feel like they're enjoying having a good time, right? Having fun. There's laughter. There are people who are having conversations that are not always serious in nature. And when psychological safety is at risk, you really see those spaces where people just they don't have a lot of fun. They don't they don't interject humor. They don't tell jokes. They don't talk about silly things that have happened. It's like all about business, moving from one task to the next and trying to just make it through the day. And so I think it's really important for us to support the space in which people can have some enjoyment and have fun.
You mean work can happen if people are smiling?
It actually probably will happen better if people are smiling.
Let's see.
You don't agree?
I do agree. I think today's environment cultivates an over seriousness.
I totally agree. Yeah.
And I think the effect bleeds. We talk about work, but what does that do with the relationship with your kids or with your spouse or with your friends or with your family? It becomes a weight that you just can't escape.
Absolutely. Yes.
So, pretty important topic.
It is an important topic.
All right. So, as we get into this space, what I've always found is, and I know not everybody's the same, I'll talk about me. The space where I feel the most engaged is when I get to be creative and innovate and just sort of be in that space.
Yes.
But that's a dangerous space, I think, or people perceive that as a place of danger.
Why do you say that's danger? Why do you use that terminology?
Well, probably for a couple of factors. One, I think we live in a hyperculture of competition and performance. And if I sit in a meeting and tell my good ideas, you're going to take them and get promoted because you've stolen my work. That's one.
For sure. Yes.
I actually don't think
Also
that's
a very, very big sign of a toxic environment.
very toxic.
Yes.
I don't think that's number one, though. I think number one is actually something you've already alluded to. I think, if you're in an environment where the person in charge is the smartest person in the room, or at least
Self-proclaims.
yes.
Yes.
I think that's really tough. Have you
We
ever?
all know that person.
It's me. I'm kidding. I hope I'm kidding. What I try really hard to do is never over prepare for a meeting. And I think actually this is probably something that everybody out listening to us should self-check. Do you over prepare for meetings? And here's what I mean. If I'm going to bring my team in because I have a problem to solve,
Yeah.
and I over prepare, what I'm actually over preparing is answering the questions. And so then I'm bringing them in and doing a report out. And in my opinion, there's nothing more demoralizing than having somebody call you in to help you solve a problem. And then all they do is tell you what the answer they're going to use is.
Absolutely.
And then attach your name to it.
Yeah. So this is actually a really interesting topic. I'm going to tell a story.
Please.
I had a team member of mine who was a extremely talented, very talented person, very smart, very articulate, and could probably sell oceanfront property in Arizona. Was just really smooth, really good, and over prepared for every meeting. He was a very prepared individual. And so we had a really poignant conversation about this at one point in time in his journey, because he was in a space where he needed to facilitate agreement between two teams. The majority of the work that was the outcome of his job needed to be facilitating agreement between two teams. And he was doing it in a private way instead of in a public way. And instead of having people come into a conversation and actively feed off of each other to get to a common ground, he was doing all that work behind the scenes and coming over prepared to the meeting and not actually seeing people or helping people see that be facilitated in a discussion.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't a lot of understanding between each of the two teams he was trying to facilitate agreement with. There was just, hey, this is what we agreed to. And it was a really interesting journey for him in his professional development. He was a young professional, and, he felt like dealing with an executive, I need to be very prepared. And the reality is you need to be able to ask good questions.
Yes.
And not over prepare on the answers. Kind of let it flow. Let the conversation go where the conversation should go.
Now, I think for our listeners, I think a very healthy preparation is to understand where you want to get to.
Yep.
And I think that can help you guide the right questions.
Absolutely.
And, well, Robbie, what's the difference between knowing where you want to get to and coming in with the answer? Well, what I mean by that is where I want to get to is having the answer by the time we finish this meeting. I want to end in a space that satisfies X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how we get to there.
Yep.
Well, will that do it? And is that good for your team, or is that good for my team, or et cetera? And then actually writing things down and allowing the conversation. And even if it's exactly what you would have thought of, you now have the buy-in of those teams.
Absolutely.
And I think over prep. I think we're in a hyper over prep space.
That's an interesting concept, because I agree with you now that we're speaking about this. I think that we do over prepare for those conversations. And that's why I think meetings are often ineffective. It's ineffective in getting the ideas and the thoughts of people out on the table and picking the best ones or getting to the best space of common ground. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah. And actually, just a self check for those listening, when you're a participant, especially in a remote meeting, where you realize they're not asking really questions and your input isn't actually being solicited, how often do you just start working on something else during the meeting?
Often.
Right.
I have 17 meetings in my calendar every
How many
day.
people, this is rhetorical, how many people as they're working just pay attention to where their eyes and face are so it looks like I'm paying attention? Definitely not me. However, no, I'm kidding. The reality is that's actually part of a symptom of toxicity.
It is.
And not creating that environment of participation and engagement. And really work satisfaction. Work satisfaction, in my opinion, the genesis is, I've never had anybody say, oh man, I fell asleep in the bathroom today for 4 hours. Best day ever. Nobody caught me.
It's not.
That's not a great day. I mean, you don't leave and think, oh man, got him. Right? Even the worst employees I've ever had, that wasn't.
It's not a good day.
What people want to do is achieve, solve problems, to do more than expected. And that's excellent.
Yeah.
You said something I want to key on, not only to allow conversation, but to kind of recognize the good thoughts and to recognize the good achievements. What did you mean?
I think it's oftentimes people are scared. And that's when we talk about psychological safety, at the heart of it is fear. Whether it's fear of my idea not being accepted, fear of, to your point, it's a hyper-competitive environment. If I put a bad idea on the table, is that going to count against me in consideration for the next promotion? People are oftentimes scared to voice what's in their mind. They're also scared to make decisions. And, what I see happening is people are operating oftentimes in this space of fear where they just are paralyzed by the environment that's around them. And we're not getting to better spaces with our team members and in our business in general. We're not creating a space to
So how do you overcome that?
It's tough. You and I have talked about this before. It starts with yourself. You have to get yourself into a frame of mind of willingness to accept the ideas of others, to acknowledge that people are going to have better ideas than what you do, to be able to help grow and foster those ideas into something that a team can actually rally around and deploy as something healthy in an environment for growth.
And sometimes risk making a mistake.
And risk making a mistake.
And I think that's also key. I'm a firm believer that if you're not making mistakes, you're not doing anything. Have you set the allowance on any level of your team for people to make errors and not get crippled by it?
Yep.
What did we learn? The way I phrase it is, if we've paid tuition, what was the lesson we were supposed to learn, and did it make us better?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part of the recipe is being okay, as long as it's not, as long as people aren't getting injured, obviously, and you're not doing real damage to an organization. Mistakes are part of the process. And do we have a system that we've cultivated? And even if you're not at the top, within your own team and with your own, are you allowing for that? And how do we cover and help each other to learn from, with ideas or good ones?
Ooh.
So as we work through this, a lot of, this topic gets bigger and bigger as we start to digest it.
It for sure does.
The key takeaways for me that we've talked about today is controlling your energy, giving feedback, creating a space for safe ideation, and not coming with so much prepared that you're ruling out the ideas and the space for the ideas of others.
Correct.
I think the last thing I'll add to that I try to pay attention to, I currently am pretty high ranking in my organization. And I know if I come in and start a conversation and say, here's what I think, even if I'm not prepared, here's what I think. So many people will be like, I agree with Robbie.
Yep.
Oh, no, I didn't want everybody to agree with me.
It's too late to take it back.
And you can't.
Yep. It's too late to take it back.
So I'll tell you an active strategy of mine is be the last one to wrap up.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. We talked about this before. When we get people together, we're trying to solve a problem. generally we're trying to get people to align with each other and focus on solving the problem. You want people aligned with people and have those teams focused on the same problem and understanding the mission in front of them. And and if you come into a room charging in to say, "We've got this problem. I think this is what we should do. What do you guys think?"
Everybody's going to go, yes,
It
Becky.
it still results in the same thing. People going after the problem, probably somewhat aligned around how we're going to solve the problem, but you didn't get your tuition for it.
Correct.
You're not developing people for the future state.
No,
You're not.
you're sending the robots out to do robot work.
Exactly. And that's not a space where people will then feel encouraged to share their thoughts, their ideas, or their creativity. And then what ends up happening is you do become the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
Because you've created it that way.
Because you've silenced everyone else. The other component that's important to me is sharing credit and really being intentional. I'm in a capacity where I prepare our national board reports and report out, and I challenge myself to how many groups and teams can I add? Who helped, who was critical. I call people out by name. I call, and only in the positive space. I'll also tell you, I also worked that a little bit to my favor. If you're struggling with an adjacent department or a support department or a supporting group, it is amazing what happens when you call them out in front of other people for greatness.
Yeah.
It really starts to create, I don't want to say trust, because there's some groups you just can't build it, but it starts to build a mutual respect. When people realize that you're not going to throw them under a bus, they will hesitate, most folks, to throw you under the bus. There's always the few, but the majority of the bell will actually start to work with you and understand. And it really helps you, even if you're not the leader of those groups, by sharing that credit. And hey, I just want to call out X and Y for their help with this. We would have been at impasse, or this would have taken twice as long, and their help was critical. And when you do that, even in meetings and whatever, it starts to build a rapport, and people start becoming way more, I think, open to working with you and your teams. It just creates that positive space and energy.
It absolutely does. I'm going to share a story if I can. Do we have time for a story? We have time for a story.
We always have time for a story.
So our team, has been in an environment of very high growth. We're in a space where we have a lot of opportunity to grow the business that we're in. It also creates a lot of stress.
Yeah, very dangerous time.
It's very dangerous time. And it can be very stressful for team members, especially when you start thinking about psychological safety, because they get very focused on the mission and moving from task to task to task. Our CEO and I were sitting across the table from each other at dinner. He recognizes that this is the environment that we're in. And he posed the question to me, and he said, in this type of an environment, how do you help your team feel good about the work that they're doing? And what I shared with him is our Wednesday wins. So when things started getting really, really tough, we were not focusing or celebrating our wins. Not at all. We were just moving from thing to thing to thing and getting things done. And we weren't really celebrating.
Just pouring it out.
Just pouring it out
anything in.
and not putting anything back in the bank account. And so we started Wednesday Wins, which is actually like my favorite conversation of the week, because the team comes to the table every week. They're required to bring a celebratory announcement about something that they saw that was a great thing that someone did. And so we go through, our whole team does their Wednesday wins every single Wednesday. And it started with them just bringing the wins to us. And then I realized that they hadn't been celebrating that with the people who are doing the good work. Like, they were bringing it to me and saying, hey, I saw this, or I recognize that this activity happened. So one week I said, okay, you're required to go find somebody who's not on your team, not on our direct team, but someone who's outside of our group. And so they did. They went and they found, the good activity that was happening.
Search for excellence.
Yeah. in external spaces that aren't in their area of
Yeah.
influence, right? And they came back with some great things.
And how did that make them feel?
It made them feel really good, but what made them feel even better was when I ended that conversation, I said, okay, your task is to go today and talk to the person that you just recognized on this call and share with that person the good work that you recognized. And once they did that, it was an amazing transformation in not only how they recognize the good work of people in the organization, but also giving compliments to people in the organization. And that's a space where, that's psychological health. That's helping people to have better days and recognizing that, people are struggling.
Yeah, not knowing the people, not knowing the event, I can't imagine how both of those people went home that day.
Feeling much better.
Feeling much better.
Yeah.
All right. 2 books that we would throw out there that are related closely to this. You have one.
I do. The 4 Agreements.
Don Miguel Ruiz.
Yes. Which,
covering the 4 agreements you make with yourself.
yes.
On keeping your mental health and mental energy.
Yeah.
In
And
the
how
right
you're going to
space.
come to the table every day and approach your behavior, because that's really all we can control. We can't control the behavior of others. We can control how we respond in
Ours
those
and
moments.
how we receive it.
Mm-hmm.
Great recommend. The other one I would throw out there is Gung Ho. It's a little more kitschy. It's a quick read.
That's interesting.
But that is a quick read on how to control an environment inside of a much larger organization when you're not at the top. That's by Ken Blanchard.
I'm going to have to read that one. I haven't read it yet.
It's kind of like the Herbie. It's a good read. For those out there that tuned back in with us and hung in this long, we appreciate you. Please feel free to comment if there's any part of this that needs further exploration. We know this is a big topic and it's affecting a lot of people. So it's hard to cover all of that in 20 minutes. So if you've got other concerns or places you'd like us to take a deeper dive, happy to do so. And thanks for staying with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Becky.
Thanks, Robbie.